Welcome back, everybody. We're going to finish this chapter. I needed a nap. It worked out great. So let's finish this chapter. We got 10 pages left in chapter 3. We can get it done. Perhaps if we appeal again to the Emperor. Oh, wait, that's way off. I have spent much time trying to separate the things of man from those that belong to the divine. When I have done separating them, I find that there is not so great difference. Here on earth, we cannot see that, but what we have put off this body, we will know more, and know that our differences make no difference at all to God. Then why are we fighting? Asked Uther, and grinned as if he were humoring the old man. If all our differences will be resolved in heaven, why do we not lay down our arms and embrace the Saxons as brethren? The Merlin smiled again and said amicably, amicably, when we are perfected, it will be just so, Lord Uther, but they do not know yet it any more than we do. And while human destiny provokes men to fight, we must do our part by playing the games of this mortal life. But we need peace in this land, so that men may think of heaven instead of battle of war. Uther said, laughing, I have little taste for sitting and thinking of heaven, old man. I will leave that to you and the other priestesses. I am a man of battle. I have been so all my days, and I pray to live all my life in war, as befits a man and not a monk. Be careful what you pray for, said Merlin, looking sharply at Uther, for the gods will certainly give it to you. I do not want to be old and think of heaven and peace, said Uther, for they seem very dull to me. I want war and plunder and women. Oh, yes, women. And the priests do not approve of any of those things. Glorious said, why then you are not much better than the Saxons, are you, Uther? Your very priests say you must love our enemies, Gorlois, said Uther, laughing and reaching across the grain to slap her husband's good-naturedly on the back. And so I love the Saxon, for he gives me what I want from life. And so should you. For when we have peace like this for a little time, we can enjoy feasting and women, and back to the fight, as befits a real man. Do you think women care for the kind of man who wants to sit by the fire and till his home acres? Do you think your beautiful lady here would be as happy with a plowman as she is as happy with a duke and a leader of men? Dolores said somberly, you are young enough to say so, Uther. When you are my age, you will be sick of war too. Uther chuckled and asked, are you sick of war, my lord Ambrosius? Ambrosius smiled, but he looked very weary. He said, it would not matter if I were sick of war, Uther, for God has chosen in his wisdom to send me war all my days, and so it shall be, according to his will. I will defend my people, and so must those who come after. Perhaps in your days, or the days of our sons, we will have enough time at peace to ask ourselves what we are fighting for. Lot of Orkney broke in his smooth, equivocal voice. Why are we philosophers here, my lord Merlin? My king, even you, Uther, you have taken to philosophy? But none of this tells us what we are to do against the wild men who come at us from east and from west, and from the Saxons and from Rome. If we want legions, we must train them, and I think we needs must have our own Caesar as well. For just as soldiers need their own captains and their own kings, so all the kings in this island need someone to rule over them. Why need we call our high king by the name of Caesar, or think of him so? Asked a man Igraine had heard called by the name of Ectorus. The Caesar ruled Britain well enough in our day, but we will see the fatal flaw of an empire thus. When there is trouble in their home city, they withdraw the legions and leave us to the barbarians. Even Magnus Maximus, he was no emperor, said Ambrosius, smiling. Magnus Maximus wished to be emperor, but when he commanded the legion here, it is a common ambition for a war duke. And Agrena saw the quick smile he gave Uther over their heads. So he took his legions and marched on Rome, wishing to be proclaimed emperor. He would have been neither the first nor the last to do so, with the army to support him. But he never got so far as Rome, and all his ambitions came to nothing except for some fine stories and your Welsh hills. Uther, do they not talk still of Magnus the Great, who came, who will come, who will with his great sword at the head of his legions, rescuing them from all invaders? They do, said Uther, laughing. They have put upon him the old legend from time out of mind of the king who was and the king who will come again to save his people when the need is dire. Why, if I could find such a sword as that, I could find myself going into the hills of my country and raising as many legions as I wanted. Perhaps, said Crotus somberly, that is what we need, a king out of legion. Wait, a king out of legend. If the king come, if the king come, the sword will not be far to seek. Your priest would say, the Merlin said evenly, that the only king who was and will be, is their Christ in heaven, and that following in his holy cause, you need no other. Eructus laughed, a short, harsh laugh. That's kind of a laugh. Christ cannot lead us into a battle, nor I intend no blasphemy, my Lord King. Would the soldiers follow a banner of the Prince of Peace? Perhaps we should find a king who would put them in memory of the legends. Uther said, and silence fell in the room. Igraine, who had never listened before to the counsels of men, could still read enough thoughts that know what they were all hearing in the silence, the knowledge that the high king who sat before them now would not live to see another summer. Which of them would sit in the high seat next year at this time? I don't know. Let's find out. Ambrosius leaned. Wait. Ambrosius leaned his head against the back of his chair, and that was Lot's signal to say in his eager, jealous voice, "You are weary, sire. We have tried you. Let me call your chamberlain." Ambrosius smiled gently at him. "I will rest soon enough, cousin, and long enough." But even the effort of speech was too much for him, and he sighed, a long, shaking sound, letting Lot help him from the table. Behind him, the men broke up into groups, talking, arguing in low tones. The men called Eructus, "Come to you join Gorlois. My lord of Orkney loses no opportunity to plead his case and disguise it as thoughtfulness for the king. Now we are the evil men who have wearied Ambrosius and will shorten his life." Lot does not care who is named High King, Gorlois said, so that Ambrosius had no opportunity to state his preference, by which many of us, I among them, I may as well tell you, Atrocious would be bond. Atrocious said, "Well, how not? Ambrosius had no son and cannot name an heir, but his wish must guide us, and he knows it. Uther is far too eager for the purple of a Caesar to suit me, but all in all, he is better than Lot. So if it shall come to choice of our sour apples." Gorlois nodded slowly. "Our men will follow Uther, but the tribes Bendigeidfran and that crew, they will not follow any man so Roman as that. And we need the tribes. They would follow Orkney." "Lot has not the stuff to make a high king," Eructus said. "Better we lose the support of the tribes than the support of the entire countryside. Lot's way is to split everyone up into warring factions so that only he has the confidence of all. Faugh!" He spat. "The man's a snake, and that's all there is to it. And yet, he's persuasive," Gorlois said. "He has brains and courage and imagination. So has Uther, and whether or not Ambrosius gets the chance to say so formally, Uther's the man he wants." Glorious set his teeth grimly and said, "True, true. I'm in honor bound to the Ambrosius will. Yet I wish his choice had fallen on a man whose moral character matched his courage and his leadership. I do not trust Uther, and yet," he shook his head, glanced at Igraine, "child, this can be of no possible interest to you. I will have my man at arms escort you back to the house where we lay at night." where we lay last night. Dismissed like a little girl, Igraine went homeward in the noontime without protest. She had a good deal to think about. So men too, even glorious Gore Lewis, could be bound and honored to endure what they did not want to do. She had never thought of that before, and Uther's eyes fixed on her haunted her thoughts. How he had stared at her. No, not at her, at the moon star. Had the Merlin enchanted it somehow so that Uther should be smitten with the woman who bore it? Must I do the Merlin's will, and Vivian's must I be given the Uther's resi- resistless, resistless, as I was given to Gore Lewis? The thought repelled her, and yet her mind perversely still felt Uther's touch on her hand, the intensity of his gray eyes meeting her own. I might as well believe that the Merlin enchanted the stone, so that my mind would turn to Uther. They had reached her lodging, and she went inside and took off her moonstone, thrusting it to the pouch tied at her waist. How foolish, she thought. I do not believe in those old tales of love charms and love spells. She was a woman grown, 19 years, not a passive child. She had a husband. She might even now be bearing in her womb the seed that would become the son he desired. And if her fancy should light on some man other than her husband, if she should wish to play the wanton, the wanton, okay, if she should play the wanton, surely there are other men more appealing than that great boor, with his untidy hair like a Saxon's and his Northman's manners, upsetting mass, interrupting the High King's breakfast. Why, she might as well take Gore Lewis's man at arms, who was at least young and clear-skinned and handsome, to her bed. Not that she, a virtuous wife, had any interest in taking any man whatsoever to her bed except her lawful husband. And again, if she did, it would not be Uther. Why would he be worse than Gore Lewis, a great clumsy oaf, even if his eyes were gray as the sea and his hands strong and unwrinkled? Agrena swore under her breath, took her distaff from the pack of her belongings, and sat down to spin. What was she doing daydreaming of Uther, as if she were seriously considering what Vivian had asked of her? Would Uther really be the next High King? She had seen the way he looked at her, but Gore Lewis said he was a leecher. Might he look the way at any woman? If she must lose herself in daydreams, she might as well wonder something sensible, such as how Morgane was faring without her mother, and if the housekeeper was keeping a watchful eye on Morgus, so that she did not cast sheep's eyes at the soldiers guarding the castle. Morgause now, she might run about and lose her maidenhood to some handsome man without thought of honor and propriety. What? She hoped Father Columbia would give the girl a good lecture. My own mother chooses what lovers she would to father her child, and she is a great priestess of the Holy Owl. Vivian has done the same. Igraine let her spindle drop into her lap, frowning a little, thinking of Vivian's prophecy that her child by Uther could be the great king that would heal the land and bring the warring's people together in peace. What she had heard this morning at the king's table convinced her that such a king was far to seek. She took up her spindle in exasperation. They needed such a king now, not where some child not yet even conceived should grow to manhood. The Merlin was obsessed with the old legends about kings. What was it? One of the kings was kings. Was it Ictrotus, he said, about Magnus the great war leader, who had deserted Britain in quest of an emperor's crown? Nonsense. To think a son of Uther could be this Magnus' return. Late that day, a bell began to toll, and shortly after, Gore Lewis came into the house, looking sad and discouraged. Ambrosius died a few moments ago, he said. The bell tolls for his passing. Oh, that's sad. She saw the grief in his face and spoke to it. He was old, she said. He was much loved. I met him only this day, but I can see he was the kind of man whom all those around him would love and follow. Gorluis sighed heavily. True, and we have no such to come after him. He has gone and left us leaderless. I loved the man, Igraine, and I hated to see him suffer. If there was any successor worthy of the name, I would rejoice that he has gone to his rest. But what will become of us now? A little later, he asked her to set out his best clothing. At sunset, they will say a regime mass for him, and I must be there. So should you, Igraine. Can you dress yourself with no woman to robe you, or shall I ask our host to send you a maid? I can dress myself, Igraine set about putting on her own gown, finely spun wool with embroidery at hem and sleeve, and braiding her silk ribbon into her hair. She ate a little bread and cheese, or Lewis would eat nothing, saying that with his king before the throne of God, where his souls would be judged, he would fast and pray till he was buried. Igraine, who had been taught in the holy hour that death was no more than a gateway to the new birth, could not understand this. How could a Christian have such fear and trembling at going to his eternal peace? She remembered Father Columbia chanting some of his doubtful psalms. There we go. Yes, there, God was supposed to be a God of fear and punishment as well. She could understand how a king, for the good of his people, might have to do something which would lie heavily on his consciousness. If even she could understand and forgive that fucking mosquito. Forgive that, how could a merciful God be more bigoted and vengeful than the least of his mortals? She supposed it was one of their mysteries. She was still pondering these things when she went at Gorluis's side to the mass and listened to the priest singing dolefully about the judgment of God and the day of wrath when the soul should face eternal damnation. Halfway through this hymn, she saw the Uther Pendragon kneeling at the far end of the church, his face white above his pale tunic, lifted his hands to cover his face and conceal sobs. A few minutes later, he got up and went out of the church. She realized that Gorluis was looking sharply at her and lowered her eyes again to listen piously to the endless hymns. But when the mass was over, the men clustered outside the church, and Gorluis introduced her to the wife of King Uranus of North Wales, a plump, solemn matron, and the wife of Ectorius, whose name was Flavilla. All right. A smiling woman, not a great deal older than Agrena. She chatted with the woman for a moment, but their minds were all on what the death of Ambrosia would mean to the soldiers and to their husbands. And her mind wandered. She had little interest in women's chatter and their poise. Demeanor wearied her. Flavilla was about 6 moons pregnant. 6 moons? What is 6 moons? Is that 6 months? 6 moons? I'm not sure. I'm going to say that's 6 months pregnant. 6 moons. Her belly began to bulge under her Roman-style tunic, and after a time their talk drifted to their families. Flavilla had borne 2 daughters who had died of the summer flux last year. Oh, that's sad. And she was hoping that this year for a son. Urena's wife, Gwyneth, had a son about Morgane's age. They asked about Igrena's child and talked about the efficiency of bronze amulets against winter fevers, and the charm of laying a priest's mass book in the cradle against the rickets. It is bad food which causes rickets, Igrena said. My sister, who is a healing priest, told me that no child who is suckled for 2 full years by a healthy mother ever suffers from rickets. but only if it is given to an ill-nourished wet nurse or weaned too soon and fed on gruel. Ooh. I call that foolish superstition, Gwyneth said. The Mass book is holy and effective against all illnesses, but particularly those of little children, who have been baptized against the sins of their fathers and have committed no sins of their own. Agranus shrugged impatiently, unwilling to argue with such nonsense. The women went on talking about charms against childhood sickness, while she stood casting her eyes the way at that. Casting her wait. She stood casting her eyes this way and that, waiting for an opportunity to leave them. After a time, another woman joined them, whose name Igraine never knew. She too was bulging in late pregnancy, and the woman immediately drew the newcomer in to their talk, ignoring Igraine. After a time which she slipped quietly away, saying unheard that she was going in search of Gorluis, and walked toward the back of the church. There was a little graveyard there, and behind it an apple orchard. The branches whitened with blossoms, pale in the twilight. The scent of the apple trees was fresh and welcome to Igraine, who found the smell of the city intrusive. Dogs and men, too, relived themselves in the stone streets. Behind every door was a smelly kitchen midden with everything from dirty rushes, smelling of urine and rotting meat, to the contents of night pots. At Tintangle, there was kitchen refuse and night soil too, but she had it buried every few weeks, and the clean smell of the sea washed away everything. She walked slowly through the orchard. Some of the trees were very old, gnarled, with low bending boughs. Then she heard a slight sound. She heard a sound, y'all. She heard a sound. Hey, thank you so much for the love. I haven't been looking up because I've been reading. Thank you so much. I see you. I see you. It's a pleasure, Doris. I hope you're enjoying the read. I know it's not the best because I've been stuttering, but hope you're enjoying it. Sending you love. All right, let's keep going. We're almost done this chapter, y'all. We're getting there. This was a really long chapter. Saw that one day of the low branches a man was sitting. He did not see a grain. His head went bent, and his face was covered with his hands. But she knew by the pale hair that it was Uther Pendragon. She was about to turn and steal quietly away, knowing he would not want her to see his grief. But he had heard her light step and raised his head. "Is it you, my lady of Cornwall?" His face twisted and looked worried. "Now you may run to tell the brave Gorluis that the War Duke of Britain has hidden away to weep like a woman." She went swiftly to him. Troubled by his anger and defensive face, she said, "Do you think Gorluis does not grieve, my lord? How cold and heartless any man should be not to weep for the king he has loved all his days. If I were a man, I would not wish to follow any leader into war who would not weep for the dead whom he had loved, for fallen comrades, or even for brave enemies." Luther drew a long breath, wiping his face with the embroidered sleeve of his tunic. He said, "Why, that's true. When I was a young man, I slew the Saxon chief Horsa in the field after many battles where he had challenged me and then escaped. And I wept for his death because he was a gallant man. Even though he was Saxon, I felt sorrow that we must be foemen instead of brothers and friends. But in the years between, I have come to feel that I am too old to weep for what cannot be mended. And yet, when I heard the Holy Father in their practicing of judgment and eternal damnation before the throne of God, and I remember how good and how pious a man Ambrosia was, and how he loved and feared God, and never skipped to do a kind or a honorable thing. Sometimes I find this of theirs too much to endure, and I almost wish I could listen without damnation to the wise Druids, who talk of no judgment but what a man brings on himself by the way he lives. If the holy bishop speaks soothing, Ambrosius now lies in the Ambrosius now lies in the fires of hell, not to be redeemed until the end of the world. I know little of heaven, but I could wish to think my king there, she said, reaching out her hand to him. I do not think the priests or I do not think the priests of Christ know any more of what comes after death than do any other mortal men. Only the gods know. They tell us in the holy hour where I was reared that death is the way that death is always the gateway to the new life and further wisdom. And although I do not know the Ambrosius well, I, I like to think he is now learning at the feet of his God what true wisdom can be, what wise God would consign a man to tell for ignorance instead of teaching him better in an afterlife. She felt Uther's hand touch hers, and he said into the darkness, why it is so. What is it their apostle said? Now I see as in a glass, darkly, but then I shall see face to face. Perhaps we do not know every priest. Perhaps we do not know, not even the priestesses, priests, 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 priests. There we go. Not even the priests. This word's getting me. Priests would what will befall beyond death. If God is all wise, why should we imagine he will be less merciful than men? Christ, they say, was sent to us to show God's love, not his judgment. They sat in silence for some time. Then Uther said, Where do you think Then Uther said, Where do you learn such wisdom, Igraine? We have holy ladies in our church, but they are not married, nor do they move among us sinners. I was born in the Isle of Avalon, and my mother was a priestess in the great temple there. Avalon, he said, it lies in the summer sea, does it not? You were at the council this morning. You know where we are to go there? The Merlin has promised me that he will take me to King Leodranes, yeah, and introduce me to his court. Although wait, I missed a whole paragraph, y'all. I was born in the Isles of Avalon, and my mother was a priestess in the great temple there. Avalon, he said, it lies in the summer sea, does it not? You were at the council this morning. The Merlin has promised me that he will take me to the king Leo Dergars and introduce me to his court. Although if Lot of Orkney has his way, Uranus and I will go back to Wales like dogs howling, with our tails between our legs, or we will fight in the train and pay him homage, which I will do when the sun rises over the western coast of Ireland. Oh. Gorluis said, You are sure to be the next High King, Igraine said, and it struck her with sudden wonder that she was sitting here on the tree branch with the next High King of Britain, talking about religion and matters of the state. He felt it too. She could sense it in the tone of his voice when he said, I never thought to discuss such matters with the wife of a Duke of Cornwall. Do you truly think that women know nothing of state matters? She asked. My sister, Vivian asked, My sister Vivian, like my mother before her, is the Lady of Avalon. King Leodegrance and other kings came often to consult with her about the fate of Britain. Uther said, smiling, "Perhaps I should consult with her on the best way to bring Le- Le- Leo de Grames and band of Les Britain into the fellowship. For if they listen to her bidding, then all I must do is win her confidence. Tell me, is the lady married? And is she handsome?" Okay. Igraine giggled. "She is a priestess. A priestess of the Great Mother may not marry, nor make alliance with any mortal man. They belong to the gods alone." And then she remembered what Vivian had told her, and that this man sitting on the tree branch beside her was part of the prophecy. She stiffened, frightened of what she had done. Stupid bugs. Was she walking on her own feet into the trap Vivian and the Merlin had set for her? "What is it, Igraine? Are you cold? Are you frightened of war?" Uther asked. She said, grasping at the first thing she could think of to say, "I have been talking to the wives of the Uranus and Sir Icterus. They do not seem much concerned with matters of the state. I think that's perhaps. Wait, I think that's the way Gorluis does not believe that I can know anything of them either." Jesus. Uther laughed. He said, "I know the ladies Flava and Gwyneth. They do indeed leave all things to their husbands, save those dealings with spinning and weaving and childbearing, and such women's things. Have you no interest in those things? Or are you as young as you look, too young almost to be wedded, let alone have children to worry about?" "I've been married for 4 years," Irena said, "and I have a daughter who is 3 years old. I could envy Gorluis that. Every man wants children to succeed him. If Ambrosius had a son, we would not know. We would not know. We would not now. There we go. Not now be in this turmoil. Now," Uther sighed, "I do not like to think of what will befall Britain if that toad or Orkney should come to be the High King. Nor Uranus, who thinks everything can be solved by sending a messenger to Rome." Again his voice broke in a sob. "Men say I am ambitious to be High King, but I would give all my ambitions for Ambrosius to be sitting here on the tree branch beside us, or even a son of his, to be crowned in that church tonight." Ambrosius was frightened of what would befall when he was gone. He might have died last winter, but he hoped to make us agree on who should follow him. How was it that he had no sons? That's a good question. "Oh, he had sons, 2 of them. One was slain by a Saxon, Constantine was his name, like the king who converted this island. The other died of a wasting fever when he was but 12 years old." Oh, that's sad. He said, often and often, that I had become the son he wanted. He buried his face in his hands again, weeping. "He would have made me his heir as well, but that the other kings would not have it. They followed me as a war duke, but others were jealous of my influence. Lot, damn him, was the worst. Not for ambition, Igrana, I swear it, but literally to finish what Ambrosius left undone. I think everyone knows that," she said, stroking his hand. She felt will die. Did I get it? She said, stroking his hand. She felt immobilized by his grief. "I do not think Ambrosius could be happy even in heaven. If he looks down and sees the sorrow and confusion here, the kings already plotting, each one seeking to seize power for himself. I wonder if it would have been his will that I should murder Lot to take power. Once he made us swear the oath of blood brothers. I would not violate that," Uther said. His face was wet with tears. Igraine, as she would have done with her child, took the light veil around her face and dried them. I know you will do what you must do in honor, Uther. No man Ambrosius trusted so much could do otherwise. The flare of light torch suddenly struck across their faces. She froze on the tree branch, her veil still at Uther's face. Gorluis said sharply, "Is it you, my lord, Pendragon? Have you seen— Ah, madame, are you there?" Igraine, feeling ambushed, and suddenly guilty at the sharpness of Gorluis's voice, slipped off the tree branch. Her skirt caught on a projecting limb, hauled up above her knee so that she was bare to her linen drawers. She twitched it hastily down and heard the fabric rip. Oh no. "I thought you lost. You were not in our lodging," Gorluis said harshly. What do you here in heaven's name?" Uther slipped off the tree branch. The man she had been seen revealed weeping for his lost king and foster father, dismayed at the burden laid on him, had vanished in a moment. His voice was loud and hearty. "Why, Gorluis, I grew impatient at all the gabbling of that priest, and came out to find clear air with no poised mumblings. And your lady, who had found the blitherings of the good ladies not much more to her taste, happened upon me here. Madame, I thank you," he said, with a distant bow, and strode away. She noticed he was careful to keep his face out of the torchlight. Gorluis, alone with the grain, looked at her with angry suspicion. He said, gesturing her to walk before him, "My lady, you should be more careful to avoid gossip. I told you to keep away from Uther. His reputation is such that not chaste women should be seen in private conversations with him." Igraine turned and said angrily, "Is that what you think of me? That I am some sort of woman who would slip away to couple with a strange man like a beast in the field? Do you think I was lying with him on the branch of that tree, like some bird of the burrow? Would you like to inspect my gown to see whether it is rumpled from lying with him on the ground?" Glorious lifted his hand and struck her. Oh my God, why? Not very hard across the mouth. "You will not play the shrew with me, madame. I told you to avoid him. Obey me." I don't like that at all. I don't like that at all. "I think you honest and chaste, but I would not trust you to that man, nor hear you made the subject of the tongues of women. Surely there is no more evil mind that of a good woman, unless perhaps is that the mind of a priest," said Igraine wrathfully. She rubbed her mouth where Gorluis's blow had knocked her lip against her teeth. "How dare you lay hands upon me? When I betray you, you may beat the flesh from off my bones, but I won't be beaten for talk. Do you think, in the name of all the gods, that we were talking of love? And what were you talking about with that man at this hour in God's name?" "We talked about many things," Igraine said, "and mostly of Ambrosius in heaven, and yes, of heaven, and what one could hope to find in the afterlife." Gorluis regarded her with a skeptical glare. "That I find unlikely, when he could not show respect for the dead by staying through the Holy Mass. He was sickened, as I was, by all those doleful psalms, as if they were mourning the worst of men instead of the best of kings." Good. "Before God, all men are miserable sinners," Igraine, "and in the eyes of Christ a king is no better than other mortals." Yes, yes," she said impatiently. "I have heard your priests say so, and also they spend much time and labor to tell us all that God is love, and our goodly Father in heaven. Yet I notice that they are very careful not to fall into his hands, and they mourn for those who go to their eternal peace, exactly as for those who go to be sacrificed on the blood altar of the great raven herself. I tell you, Uther and I were talking about what priests know of heaven, which I think is not very much. If you and Uther spoke of religion, it is for certain the only time that man of blood ever did so." Gorluis grumbled. Agrinas said, and now she was angry. "He was weeping, Gorluis, weeping for the king, who had been as a father to him. And if it shows respect for the dead to sit and listen to the caterwauling of priests, then may I have never have such respect. I invived Uther that he was a man and could come and go as he chose. And for sure, if I had been born a man, I would never have sat peacefully and hearkened to yonder foolishness in church. But I was not free to go, being dragged thither at the word of a man who thinks more of priests and psalms than of the dead. They had reached the door of their lodging. Gorluis, his face turning dark with wrath, pushed her angrily within. You will not speak to me in that voice, lady, or I shall beat you in earnest. What? Igraine realized that she had actually bared her teeth like a hunting cat, and her voice hissed as she said, touch me at your pearl, Gorluis, or I shall teach you that your daughter of holy owls is no man's slave nor servant. Ooh, it's getting good. She's about to fuck him up. Gorluis opened his mouth for an angry retort, and for a moment Igraine thought he would strike her again. Instead, with an effort, I'm waiting for this mosquito to come back so I can kill it. Instead, with an effort, he mastered his anger and turned away from her. It is not fitting that I stand here brawling when my king and my lord lies still unburied. You may sleep here tonight if you are not afraid to be alone. If you are so, I shall have you escorted to the house of Erotus to sleep with Flavilla. My men and I will fast and pray until sunrise tomorrow, when Ambrosius will be laid in the earth to rest. Igraine looked at him with surprise and a curious growing contempt. So, for fear of the dead man's shade, even though he called it by another name, and thought of it as respect, he would not eat nor drink nor lie with a woman till his king was buried. Christians said they were free of the superstitions of the Druids, but they had their own, and Igraine felt that these were even more distressing, being separated from nature. Suddenly, she was very glad that this night she need not lie with Gorluis. No, she said, I am not afraid to be alone. That's chapter 3. Yay! All right. Now we take another break here. That was a 42-minute getting the rest of that chapter done. We're going to take another break, and then we're going to get into chapter 4. And chapter 4 is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's 10 pages long, so I need another 10-15 minute break, and then we will be back and we'll be doing chapter 4. I want to thank everybody for stopping by. I hope y'all are enjoying the read. I told y'all we will catch up. It's just going to take some time because it's a lot to read. It's fine writing for my eyes, and it's just a lot to read. So I want to thank y'all so much for stopping by. I'll be back in about another 15 minutes, and we will go into chapter 4 of The Mist of Avalon. I'll see y'all here shortly. I love y'all. Remember, stay amazing because you are amazing. Peace and love, y'all. Peace and love. I'll be right back. 15 minutes, y'all. 15 minutes.